The hallway echoed with silence. Not the normal kind of silence you'd expect from a school building at night, but the heavy, suffocating kind. The kind that made every flicker of the fluorescent lights feel like a warning. The doors were locked, the classrooms dark, but one figure lingered in the building long after everyone else had gone. Her name was Claire Hensley, a young teacher with more passion for her students than most administrators could ever understand. She had stayed behind to collect her belongings, ordered to leave her classroom permanently. The reason? No one had told her. All she knew was that earlier that morning, she had been called into the principal's office. No explanation, no discussion. Just one cold directive. You are not permitted to teach here anymore. Collect your things. And that was it. No hearing. No accusations. No chance to defend herself. Just a locked door to a career she had poured her life into. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about her. First, she thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe some paperwork issue, or perhaps the school board had shuffled staff. But then she noticed something chilling. When she returned to her classroom to pack her things, she found the drawers of her desk already emptied. Her personal items, photographs, lesson plans, even the journal she kept, were gone. It was as if someone had expected her removal before it even happened. And yet, not a single colleague spoke up. Not a single parent called to ask why. It was as though everyone knew, but no one dared to say anything. That evening, as Claire carried the last box of books down the empty hall, she overheard voices. They came from the teacher's lounge. Low whispers, hurried, almost afraid. We can't let her back in. If she talks, it's over. Her heart raced. Were they talking about her? Claire crept closer, her shoes squeaking against the tile. But as she approached, the voices fell silent. By the time she pushed the door open, the lounge was empty. Chairs neatly tucked, coffee still steaming. Someone had been there moments ago. Someone who didn't want her to hear the truth. Determined to find out why she was being forced out, Claire returned to her classroom one last time. There, in the back of the room, stood a metal cabinet she rarely used. But now, it was locked tight with a chain she had never seen before. Inside that cabinet were lesson materials she had never shared with anyone. Research she had done, ideas she was developing for a program to help struggling students. Why would the administration lock it up? Unless they didn't want her to have access to it. She tried tugging on the chain, but it didn't budge. Then she noticed something carved faintly into the cabinet's metal door. Do not open. For staff eyes only. Her blood ran cold. It was her classroom, her cabinet, her work. But someone had claimed authority over it, and over her without explanation. That night, Claire carried her box of belongings to her car. As she opened the trunk, a folded piece of paper slipped out from between her books. It wasn't hers. She unfolded it. In hurried handwriting, it read, "If you value your safety, stop asking questions. You were never supposed to see what's inside that cabinet." Her heart pounded in her chest. Someone was watching her. Someone knew she was suspicious. And more importantly, someone was warning her not to dig deeper. But Claire wasn't the type to walk away. She had taught her students to always search for the truth. And now she owed it to herself to do the same. The only question was, what secret was so dangerous it could get a teacher erased from her own classroom? Claire couldn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, the note clutched in her hand. If you value your safety, stop asking questions. You were never supposed to see what's inside that cabinet. The words echoed in her mind, each one a reminder that someone, maybe more than one person, was watching her every move. But there was something else. The handwriting wasn't neat, but it wasn't random either. It looked rushed, yes, but not sloppy. Almost deliberate. Whoever had written it wanted her to take it seriously. Claire tried to convince herself that it was just a prank. Teachers sometimes played little games to relieve the stress of their jobs. Maybe it was some colleague's dark sense of humor. But then she remembered the locked cabinet. The way her desk had been cleared before she was even dismissed. The whispers in the lounge. No, this was no prank. The next evening, Claire returned to the school. She had no key anymore, But she knew the custodian, an old man named Mr. Alvarez, would be making his rounds. Sure enough, she spotted him near the back entrance, wheeling a trash bin. "Mr. Alvarez," she called softly. He jumped at her voice, nearly dropping his keys. His eyes darted nervously down the hall before he whispered, "You shouldn't be here, Miss Hensley. They told me you were gone." "I just need a few minutes," Claire pleaded. "I left something in my room. Please." Mr. Alvarez hesitated, his wrinkled face tightening with unease. Finally, he sighed and handed her the keys. "You didn't get them from me, and you never saw me tonight." Her classroom was dark, only a sliver of moonlight slipping through the blinds. Claire went straight to the cabinet. The chain was still wrapped tightly around it. This time, though, she was prepared. She had brought a small set of tools, left over from her father's garage. It took several tense minutes, but finally the lock snapped open with a sharp metallic crack. She froze, listening for footsteps. Nothing. Slowly, she opened the cabinet. Inside, she expected to see her teaching materials, maybe confiscated notes or lesson plans. Instead, she found files. Thick, manila folders stamped with the school's insignia, each one labeled with the name of a student. Her hands trembled as she pulled the first one out. Inside were pages of detailed personal information, medical records, disciplinary reports, even private family histories. But what chilled her most were the notes scrawled in the margins. "Monitor closely. High risk. Potential removal." She flipped through folder after folder, her horror growing. The school wasn't just keeping track of grades. It was compiling dossiers on students, secrets no one should have access to. And then, she found one with her name. The folder labeled Hensley. Claire was thinner than the others, but its contents made her blood run cold. The first page was a profile. Name, Claire Hensley. Position, teacher, grade 10 English. Status, terminated, non-compliant. Non-compliant? She turned the page. It listed incidents, but they weren't true. Notes about her questioning administrative decisions, encouraging students to think independently, and showing interest in restricted material. Restricted material? She had no idea what that even meant. The final note on the page made her stomach twist. Immediate removal recommended. Risk of exposure. Exposure of what? Suddenly, a noise broke the silence. A faint creak, like the sound of a door opening at the end of the hall. Claire shoved the folders back into the cabinet, rewrapping the chain loosely. She barely had time to slip the incriminating file on herself into her bag before footsteps echoed closer. Her pulse quickened. She ducked behind a row of desks, crouching low. The classroom door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, their outline framed by the dim hallway light. It wasn't Mr. Alvarez. It wasn't a teacher. It was someone she had never seen before, tall, wearing a long dark coat, moving with deliberate calm. The figure scanned the room, eyes lingering on the cabinet. Then, after a moment, they stepped back out into the hallway. Claire waited until the footsteps faded before she dared to breathe again. Whoever that was, they weren't here by accident. They were looking for the files. And if they discovered she had taken her own folder, she knew her problems were only just beginning. Driving home that night, Claire felt the weight of the folder in her bag like a bomb waiting to explode. She now had proof that the school was hiding something, compiling secret files on students and staff alike. Proof that her dismissal wasn't random, but calculated. But what could she do with it? If she went to the school board, would they even believe her? If she went to the police, would they take her seriously? Or would the files mysteriously vanish before anyone could investigate? As she pulled into her driveway, headlights flashed behind her. A car she hadn't noticed before slowed to a crawl, then parked across the street. Someone was watching her. Claire didn't sleep for 2 nights. Every creak of her apartment, every distant siren, became a possible sign that someone had come for her. The folder on her kitchen table seemed to breathe. She kept telling herself she had to be careful, but she also knew that doing nothing felt like walking away from her students' lives. On the 3rd day, she returned to school at dawn. Not to retrieve more files. She already had what she needed, but to talk to the one person who had been kind to her since day one, Mr. Alvarez. He was sweeping the front steps, the cedar broom whispering on concrete. When he saw her, his tired face softened, and something like relief flickered across his features. "You came back," he said, as if it had been a question and an accusation in the same breath. "I need your help," Claire said without preamble. She told him everything in short sentences, careful not to sound hysterical. The note, the cabinet, the folders, the figure in the coat. He listened, hands wrapped round the broom as if steadying himself. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "There are things around here people don't talk about," he said, voice low. "But I don't like secrets that hurt children." He led her into the boiler room, a place teachers rarely went, filled with the smell of oil and the faint hum of pipes. He closed the heavy door and locked it out of habit, as though the sound itself gave the room permission to be honest. "You were small, you know," he said. "At first I thought it was just discipline. Then I found this." He fished from his jacket a thin envelope and slid it across the rusted metal table. Inside were photocopies, attendance logs, counselor notes, and a spreadsheet with names circled in red. Many of the names matched the folders Claire had seen. Others were ones she hadn't found yet. "There are patterns," Mr. Alvarez whispered. "Kids with unstable housing, kids who get sick a lot, kids with parents who ask questions. They're flagged. Sometimes it's to help them. Sometimes it's to move them out. Quietly. Helps the funding balance. Helps the statistics look better." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. "Move them out," she repeated. "To where?" He didn't answer directly. He shook his head. "I don't know, but I have seen buses come late at night. Vans. A couple of times, officials with clipboards. They don't talk to us. They watch." Claire's mind raced. The files didn't just document kids. They prepared them for removal, for placement in programs, facilities, or even adoption channels she had never considered possible. Someone or some group was engineering outcomes, and the school was quietly complicit. "Why would they do this?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. "Money, control, and appearances," Mr. Alvarez said. "If the school shows higher test scores, higher graduation rates, the district looks good. Investors and developers notice easy neighborhoods. People start to think it's a safe place to build condos and malls." A chill ran through Claire. She pictured bright new buildings rising on the site of the cracked playground, the library, the old houses. She could see the pattern. Remove the unstable, tidy the numbers, sell the land. It was a brutal, efficient erasure. "We should talk to someone," Claire said. "A reporter, an advocate, someone who won't get spooked." Mr. Alvarez's eyes darted to the small window above the boiler pipes. He blinked. There was someone who used to write pieces for the city paper. Name's Hector Mendez. He's not on staff anymore, but he lives near the market. Quiet fellow. He does not play with small stories. Claire felt a small surge of hope. If there was a journalist willing to listen, perhaps the files could see the light of day. That afternoon, she left a carefully worded message at Hector Mendez's office number. An anonymous tip, almost pleading. "There is something wrong at Jefferson High. Kids are being flagged. Files exist. Please look." She expected nothing. Instead, 2 days later, a text appeared on her phone. "Meet me at the coffee truck by 3rd and Pine. Come alone." Her stomach tightened. She had always been good at reading people, at seeing the moment when a story tipped into danger. This felt like one of those moments. Yet the alternative, continuing to hide the file, to let the pattern repeat itself, felt like an ethical rot she could no longer stomach. Claire arrived at the coffee truck 5 minutes early. Hector Mendez was older than she expected. Salt and pepper hair, a weathered face, and eyes that seemed to have cataloged secrets for a living. He wore a second-hand jacket and kept his hands tucked into his pockets as if to appear non-threatening. "You called," he said, voice dry. "You didn't use my number." I left a message," Claire stammered. "I have documents." He glanced toward the school across the street, then fixed his gaze on her. You know how this game works. Papers disappear, phones die, sources suddenly change their minds. Why should I believe you? Because the kids deserve it, she said simply. Because I don't want to stay silent. Hector studied her for a long moment and then nodded. I'll look, but I can't promise anything. If what you say is true, we'll need more than just files. We'll need proof, witnesses, receipts, emails. And you need to be prepared for pushback. They agreed on a plan. Hector would quietly check school board meeting minutes and a few municipal contracts that might reveal land deals or developer interests. Claire would, very carefully, start compiling timelines from the files she had, dates when children were flagged, when certain families moved away, and any unusual visitors to the school. That night, as Claire began mapping dates on a large sheet of butcher paper, a knock came at her door. She froze. Her first instinct was to hide the file, to shove it beneath a pile of laundry and open the door with a smile. But the knock came again, sharp, impatient. She cracked the door an inch. A man in a dark coat stood there, the collar turned up, face shadowed. He looked like the figure from the hallway. Her breath hitched. "Ms. Hensley?" he asked. His voice was polite, controlled. "We're conducting routine reviews of school materials. Ms. Stevenson said you might still have some items belonging to the school. Mind if we take a look?" Claire felt the world narrow to the sound of the man's voice and the weight of the folder against her thigh where it lay hidden under a cushion. Her mouth was dry. "Routine?" she repeated, stalling. "I already returned what belonged to the school." Just a quick look," the man said. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Something in his tone made Claire understand two things at once. He expected compliance, and he would not hesitate to escalate if he didn't get it. She shut the door, heart pounding, and leaned against it, the flimsy wood doing little to steady her. They knew where she lived. They knew her routines. They were watching. The warning note had not been idle. The danger was no longer a whisper in the hallways. It had crossed her threshold. She had a choice that night. Hand over the file, maybe be spared trouble, or keep it and move forward knowing the stakes had just risen. She slid the butcher paper into a drawer, grabbed the folder, and slipped it into her bag. Then she opened a small app on her phone and typed one sentence into the notes, hitting send before she even realized it. "If I disappear, Hector has everything." Outside, the man in the dark coat walked down the steps and into the night. He did not hurry. He never had to. Claire locked the door, sat on the floor, and let the reality of the moment set in. If she wanted the truth told, she had to outrun more than fear. She had to outsmart people who had no qualms about erasing anyone who stood in their way. And somewhere, in the near future, a bus would arrive in the empty hours with papers and clipboards, and a decision would be made, for some children, forever. The school building loomed like a shadow giant against the night sky. Its windows reflected the dim glow of the street lamps, but inside, the halls were dark except for the faintest shimmer of light spilling from the principal's office. Claire's pulse quickened as she crept down the hallway. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. After weeks of unanswered questions, threats, and whispers, she was finally close to uncovering what the school was hiding. She pressed her ear to the office door. Voices. 2 of them. "The program is working. But if anyone finds out, don't worry. She's gone. Claire Hensley won't be a problem anymore." Her blood froze. They were talking about her. Claire's heart hammered as she strained to hear more. One of the voices was unmistakably Principal Rollins. But the other, deeper, steadier, a voice she had only heard once before. In a hurried meeting when the district introduced a new education consultant, Dr. Vaughn, a man who had barely spoken during that meeting, yet seemed to command more authority than anyone else in the room. Claire's hands trembled as she realized the truth. This wasn't just a school-level decision. It went higher, much higher. Suddenly, the office door creaked. Claire darted into the shadows, hiding behind a trophy case. Rollins stepped out, his face pale, a folder clutched tightly in his hands. He paused, scanned the hallway, then locked the door behind him. As his footsteps faded into the darkness, Claire slipped forward. Her fingers shook as she tried the office door. Locked. But she had anticipated this. From her pocket, she pulled a thin piece of metal, a tool one of her students had once given her as a joke when she taught them about problem-solving. Within seconds, the lock clicked. She pushed the door open. The room smelled of stale coffee and secrecy. Papers were scattered across the desk, but her eyes went straight to the filing cabinet Rollins had left slightly ajar. Inside were rows of folders, each labeled with the student's name. But these weren't academic records. They were detailed psychological profiles, anxieties, family struggles, even private counseling notes. Her stomach churned. This was information teachers weren't even supposed to have. And yet here it was, stored in secret. And then she saw it, her own name. She yanked the folder out. Her hands trembled as she flipped it open. Inside were pages of surveillance notes, times she entered the building, names of parents she spoke with, even transcripts of her private conversations with students. One line made her knees weaken. Subject suspects the program. Removal recommended. Do not allow re-entry. She wasn't fired for poor teaching. She wasn't fired for misconduct. She was fired because she asked too many questions. And whatever program they were running, they couldn't risk her finding out. At the back of the folder, something slipped out. A photograph. It showed a classroom, not hers, but one of the lower grade rooms. The students sat with small devices strapped to their wrists, glowing faintly with blue light. None of the children smiled. Written across the photo in thick black ink. Test phase. Behavioral alignment. Claire's stomach dropped. This wasn't education. This was experimentation. She shoved the photo back into the folder just as a sound shattered the silence. A click. The unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Looking for something, Miss Hensley? Claire spun around. Principal Rollins stood in the doorway, his face twisted in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, Dr. Vaughn stepped into the light, his gaze cold and unblinking. You should have left when you had the chance, Vaughn said, his voice low, deliberate. Now you've seen too much. Claire's pulse thundered in her ears. Her mind raced. She could deny it, play dumb, pretend she hadn't seen the files. But it was too late. The folder in her hand gave her away. Rollins stepped forward. You don't understand, Claire. This is bigger than you. Bigger than this school. We're shaping the future. And sometimes, sacrifices have to be made. His eyes flickered with something unsettling. Fear, maybe, or guilt. But Vaughn's face remained stone. Claire's voice shook, but she forced the words out. You're experimenting on children. You're treating them like lab rats. Vaughn didn't flinch. We're improving them, correcting their flaws. Do you know how many parents beg us to fix their kids? We're giving them exactly what they asked for. Claire clutched the folder tighter. At what cost? Progress always has a cost, Vaughn replied calmly. And tonight, that cost is you. Rollins moved closer. Vaughn raised his hand as if signaling something unseen. Claire's instincts screamed at her to run. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, she hurled the folder into Rollins' chest, sending papers flying. As he stumbled, she darted for the door. Vaughn's voice boomed after her. She doesn't leave this building. The sound of footsteps erupted behind her. Heavy, fast. More than two people. Others had been waiting in the shadows. Claire sprinted down the hall, her lungs burning, her mind racing. She didn't just have to escape. She had to get the evidence out before it was too late. The echo of Claire's footsteps thundered down the hallway as she ran. The air felt heavy, thick with fear and adrenaline. Behind her, shadows surged. Rollins, Vaughn, and others whose faces she couldn't see. Her breath came in ragged bursts as she clutched the photograph she had snatched from the folder. The one piece of evidence she could never allow them to take back. If she could make it to the exit, maybe, just maybe, she had a chance. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch out and claw at her heels. Every corner she turned, every door she passed, she half expected a hand to reach out and drag her into the dark. Stop her! Vaughn's voice boomed, cold and commanding. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. She pushed harder, forcing her legs to move faster than they ever had. But no matter how fast she ran, the pounding of footsteps behind her grew louder. Up ahead, the red glow of the exit sign burned like a beacon. Salvation. Freedom. But then slam. A heavy figure appeared at the doorway, blocking her path. One of Vaughn's men. Claire skidded to a halt, her shoes screeching against the polished floor. The man lunged, arms outstretched. With a cry of desperation, Claire ducked low, sliding across the floor beneath his grasp. The man stumbled, cursing as he crashed into a row of lockers. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She bolted for the exit, her fingers stretching toward the crash bar of the door. But before she could push through, click, the door didn't budge. It was locked. Claire's chest tightened. She spun around. Rollins was there now, panting, sweat glistening on his brow. His face wasn't cruel anymore. It was conflicted, torn. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Claire," he said, his voice trembling. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "Then tell me," she shouted. "Tell me why you're doing this to children." Rollins hesitated. His lips parted, but no words came. Then Vaughn appeared behind him, his presence like ice. "Enough," Vaughn said sharply. She made her choice. Two more men closed in from the sides, their eyes empty, mechanical, trained to obey. Claire's options shrank to nothing. She was trapped. Just as Vaughn raised a hand, signaling the men forward, a sudden crash shattered the tension. The man who had tried to block Claire earlier slammed into Vaughn from behind, sending the folder of papers scattering across the floor. It was Rollins. "Run, Claire!" he shouted, his voice breaking. "Get out while you can." For a heartbeat, Claire froze in disbelief. The principal, her enemy, was helping her? But there was no time to question it. She shoved past the dazed guard and sprinted down a side hallway Rollins had opened by knocking over a cart. Behind her, Vaughn roared like an animal. "Do not let her leave." Claire's lungs burned as she reached another exit, this one near the gymnasium. She slammed against the door, praying it wasn't locked. Click. It swung open. A rush of cold night air hit her face like freedom itself. She stumbled outside, the sound of pursuit fading behind her. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of the streetlights, the photograph still clutched tightly in her hand. Days turned into weeks. Claire went into hiding, staying with friends in secret, always looking over her shoulder. Vaughn and his people would never stop searching. But she wasn't silent. The photograph made its way to the press. Whistleblower forums lit up with her story. Parents demanded answers. Investigators were forced to act. The district denied everything, of course. They called Claire disgruntled, unstable, a liar. But the evidence was undeniable. Other staff began to step forward. Quietly at first, then louder. The secret program, the so-called behavioral alignment, was exposed. And Vaughn? He vanished before authorities could question him. Gone without a trace, like a ghost. Claire never returned to teaching, not in the traditional sense. The system had turned against her, and she knew she'd never walk into a classroom without looking over her shoulder again. But she found another way. She became an advocate, a voice for students and teachers who couldn't speak for themselves. She traveled, she wrote, she told her story wherever people would listen. And in the end, the students she had once feared she'd abandoned became her strength. They wrote her letters. They thanked her. They told her that because of her courage, they knew what it meant to stand up for what was right. Yet, even as her story spread, even as she began to heal, one thing haunted her. Late one evening, Claire returned home to find an envelope slipped under her door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. In familiar, precise handwriting, it read, "This isn't over. We'll be watching." Her blood ran cold. She looked out her window into the darkened street, but no one was there. Claire knew the fight wasn't finished. It might never be finished. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. What do you think? Was Claire truly safe? Or is Vaughn still out there pulling the strings? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this suspenseful story, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next one.